What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Sounds Heavy podcast. I'm your host, Darrell.
And I'm Trey.
All right. I see I did it right that time.
You did it right.
All right. This week we have another album review. We're going to give our impressions, our review. We're going to discuss the album Ouroboros by Semper Acerbus. Acerbus? I added an R. Acerbus.
I'm going to mispronounce this name 10,000 times in the show today because I don't know Latin. So, in fact, I tried to look up the meaning of Semper Acerbus, and I can't even remember what I looked up. Because I know Semper is always, right? Because you got like Semper Fi is always faithful with the Marines or whatever.
Yes.
But then Semper Acerbus is like, I want to say Acerbus had something to do with like gloomy.
So always depressed.
Yeah, something like that. Probably not exactly that.
Well, Ouroboros is clearly named after the virus released in Resident Evil 5, not the snake eating its tail. Which is funny because another band reached out to us wanting us to check out their album, Ouroboros. Not even kidding. That was this week.
Oh, so we got multiple Ouroboros albums to review.
Well, these guys wanted us to add. So I'm a bit of a Spotify curator these days. I have my metalcore.
Moving up in the world.
I know, right? I have my metalcore In This Together playlist that's, whatever. I made it with like the intent on showcasing non-signed bands or, like bands that are signed to these like labels that are essentially the same thing as being not signed.
Right. And
just giving a place for us all to share our music because like there's so much good stuff out there right now. Yeah. And with the accessibility of production, people are pumping out stuff that I like better than the mainstream stuff. Like, for example, in the, I don't necessarily limit it to the Christian metal space, but like these metalcore bands and these deathcore bands and stuff like that, like there's guys in these, these Facebook groups that I'm a part of that have way better music than some of the stuff that's signed and out there and getting, these big time releases or whatever.
Right.
So I don't know. Everyone has a really hard time like finding the, I don't want to say the proper way, but like the most etiquette way to, hey guys, I'm in this group where we celebrate this style of music, but I also want you to hear my music that I worked really hard on.
Yep.
So I was just like, how about I just, actually I pitched the idea for anyone other than me to do it.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, what if, because one guy got on there, he's in this band called Of Nothing. And they are freaking awesome. Some of their guitar work is very reminiscent of like old Amur, and like, it's just there's a sound to it that's like, ooh, I like this. And they're good. They've only released like 2 songs, but they're really freaking stellar. And so this guy was like, hey, I'm in this band, whatever. Let's like all support each other and like each other's Facebook pages. So he puts that out there. So then all these bands started dropping their lines and I dropped ours and I was like, hey, what's up, Ninjaloot? And so I started following the bands and listening to their music. I'm like, holy crap, these guys are good. And like, So It Begins. That's how I discovered them, that same thread.
Right.
So I was like, all right, wait a second. Somebody needs to make a playlist of like all these great bands in this group.
You somebody.
I know, right? So like 3 or 4 days later, no one did it. And then I was like, okay, I'll do it. And then so I made this playlist. And before you know it had like 100 and I think it's like 20 something followers on it, which isn't very much, but apparently it's enough to be recognized as a curator.
Yeah.
So then I started having all these PR people reach out to me. They're like, hey, would you like to check out our band? Maybe they'll fit your playlist.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, sure. And 9 times out of 10, they're good. Every now and again, you'll get one that's really a stinker. It sucks. And originally, I was saying yes to everybody,
Right.
But then the playlist is like upwards of getting close to 200 songs now. So then I was like, well, all right, there's a little bit of stuff in here that's not good. So it's kind of I didn't want it to be like this. I don't know, maybe a 5,000 song playlist is okay. I don't know. But in my head, I was like, after 200 songs, it's time to start phasing some stuff out because you're never really going to listen to it.
It's hard to even get to 200 songs, man.
Right.
Right. If imagine you click on any given playlist, Amazon, Spotify, whatever, and it's got 200-300 songs on it. You're never even going to get through that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You just shuffle it, and maybe you listen to it for a week,
right,
hoping that you don't quite hear the same stuff over and over and over
Which is what I do.
Yeah.
I just, like, when I'm here at work, I'll throw it on, throw it in shuffle, and it's like, oh, wow. when did I put this band on there? And I'll look, it says 28 days ago.
I'm starting to come around just a little bit to playlists. Just because it's allowing me, especially on Spotify, it's allowing me to discover bands and sounds that I didn't know existed. You know what I'm saying? And that's, I don't know, like, I'm a little bit OCD when it comes to how I listen to music. And so a lot of times it actually bothers me to like listen to something on shuffle. If I get an album, like I remember, I basically have flashbacks to like in high school driving in my truck, you know, and listening to one or two CDs that I had sitting in the car. And I would just listen to them over and over again because I couldn't change out the CD in the middle of driving or something. And like, I don't know, it got to where I would expect certain songs to come after certain songs.
Yeah, I was about to say, yes.
And so, you know, putting something on shuffle just started like messing with me really bad. And so then when I got Spotify, and this is, you know, 20 years later, but when I got Spotify, it's like playlists are a big deal. And so it started with the, you know, like your Discover Weekly stuff. And Discover Weekly actually throw me bands that I've already followed sometimes. But a lot of times I'm like, wow, I didn't know this band existed. Yeah. And I think that goes along with, okay, so something I want to raise up before we kind of get into the album review here is one, genre, right? Like we talked just very briefly last week about genre saturation. Yep. You know, just there being too many bands in a single genre that sound similar for you to make any differentiation. And I just want to say, like, I don't know how to deal with metal genres. I feel like there's a genre. There's too many genres.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Like when metalcore was kind of becoming a thing, and it was known as metalcore, right?
It was easy.
You had metal, which you always thought of like Metallica and hair bands and stuff like that.
Yep. Heavy distorted guitar riffs.
Yep. And then you had like death metal, which was faster metal without breakdowns, you know, and then you just started adding core to everything. And so you had like hardcore, which is like the kind of punk, you know, punk beats, but throw breakdowns and slightly heavier riffs in there, and you get hardcore. And then, you know, you start moving away from that, and I start losing track. Because when metalcore comes around, you're like, oh, you're thinking, okay, some fast guitar riffs and some breakdowns, and that's what that is. But then you branch out, and it's deathcore, techcore, technical deathcore,
mathcore,
mathcore.
I don't know what that is. I just keep seeing people say it.
Yeah, no, that's like it's totally a thing. And then you have the ones that like I don't even know how to place it inside of a genre because there's elements of a lot of bands, like a ton of bands that include, you know, deathcore stuff. They include death metal stuff. They include hardcore stuff, you know, and it's just like you don't. It's hard for me to know what to do with it, and so I say all that as a precursor to saying that like Semper Acerbus, they fit that bill. Like you can tell that there's stuff in their music that is drawn from so many different places, and I enjoyed it for that aspect because there's moments in some of these songs that I'm just like, oh man, I can almost tell you what they were listening to when they thought of that riff, you know, and that kind of thing. Of course, I can't know for sure,
right?
But I can make a pretty good guess because there's a lot of riffs that like get tossed around this heavy music scene, and everybody knows what you're talking about. Like if I mention 2 Inches from the Main Artery by Through the Eyes of the Dead, you know exactly the riffs I'm talking about. Like they come straight into your mind because that was a big song, even though it wasn't that great of a song. But it had elements in it that are just like really, really awesome. And so I you know, I'm not trying to jumpstart it. I just
no, you're good. You're good.
I just wanted to mention because it's hard for me to classify bands like this, you know, because you could say they kind of fit into that classical metalcore sound, but then you have to ask, well, leaning which way?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Do they lean towards like As I Lay Dying, Kill Switch Engage, or do they lean towards...
Which is where I think they fit.
Right.
And it actually, part of my notes was that, you know, I don't know. I will get to that eventually, what I liken them to. But yeah, like totally. I think, because then there's like the singy chorus, metalcore. And then there's the, you start getting into post-hardcore, which that
was another one. I don't even know what that is.
I don't really know what that means either.
I have a picture in my mind of what people look like that play post-hardcore music.
Right. And then
but I can't tell you what the music sounds like.
That's like your Rise Records, you know.
Oh, is that what that is?
That was what because a lot a lot of the bands that came out, you know, like you remember when Memphis Mayfire changed from Southern metal to post-hardcore?
Yeah.
Like, but then you get your breakdowns, your heavy screaming, and then your really high-pitched singing, you know?
Yeah, see, that messes me up a little bit then, because when I think of post-hardcore, I guess if I'm trying to like, think of what that sounds like, I think of As Cities Burn.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm
Well, see,
like,
and that's where
I don't even know.
That's what I thought it was. But then I don't know. I don't know anything about music. Actually, someone had reached out to us on our Instagram, and they're like, hey, you're listed as a metalcore band, but you're clearly deathcore.
How?
But I'm like,
how?
And I'm like, okay, you know what? And I said, here's the thing. We started our band, Ninjaloot, in 2006 as a straight-up haste-a-day style metalcore band.
2 steps and breakdowns.
2 steps and breakdowns, and a little bit of singing when we can incorporate it. That was, pretty much, that's what we liked. That's what we did. From there, the more we write, the more weird stuff we threw in. Like, we threw Southern metal riffs in. We started throwing blast beats in. We started throwing slam breakdowns, which we kind of always did some variation of. We've adapted our tuning over the years. Went from 6-string to 7-string. Like, we just like music, and I like to play and write stuff, and you like to play and write stuff, and it's like whatever comes out, that's what we are now. So I had said to that person who reached out to us, I was like, look, dude, we're all the cores. I don't even know.
Well, see, and that's kind of the point I wanted to get at too. Is like, that's the beauty of the quote unquote metalcore genre, is because when I think of metalcore, I think of like this broad thing, and so like when you listen to certain, not every band, okay, because there are genre defining bands that, okay, so I'll name one. As I Lay Dying, I feel like is a genre defining band. I feel like when they started doing what they were doing, maybe there were some other bands that were doing something similar, but these guys, like, you weren't used to hearing chuggy riffs with solos on top.
Right.
You know, and that's what made them special. At least that's the way you kind of thought of it. But, like, nowadays, when you talk about metalcore and you talk about, like, oh, this is deathcore, it's not metalcore, it's like, no, if you have breakdowns and if you have blast beats and you have all this stuff, like, it doesn't mean that you're have to get shoehorned into one thing or another. It just means that you've been influenced by some amazing music. And I think that's, man, to watch music grow, I think is awesome, because something that's happened over the past, 15 years that I actually lament greatly is the dying out of the rock genre. Like, there are a lot of good rock bands that still exist, but I think the vast majority of, like, good rock bands that are around nowadays are the same rock bands I was listening to when I was in high school.
Yeah.
And they just happen to still be putting out music because they can't let it die, And I like that, but it's interesting to watch music change over time. It's interesting to watch how people innovate and how somebody uses a certain style or a certain tone or something that just, like, it creates something. And then you hear a whole bunch of bands that just incorporate it, and it's like, well, now metalcore is actually just a big soup to me.
Old metal soup.
Yeah. Soup core.
Well, before we get actually into the review of the album, I wanted to say one more thing. And I might have mentioned this on the show before, but I was listening to this new metal podcast, and they were saying, like, what exactly defines a new metal band? And bouncy riffs, 7-string guitars, tuned to drop A. So clearly Ninjaloot is not metalcore or deathcore. We are new metal.
You've been dying to say that for years. I know you have.
When I heard that, I was like,
your little heart beats Korn and Limp Bizkit, and it just
finally. When I heard that, I was like, finally, we did it.
See, something beautiful, and I'm just going to go and create the bridge here. El Nino is in this album we're about to review, and that, I guess that makes Semper Acerbus. Gosh, I can't say the name right.
You just blew up our minds. Someone's Acerbus.
Semper
I want to call it
Acerbus.
Cerberus too, just because of the the dog.
So, does that make Semper Acerbus a new metal band?
I mean,
because the vocals from El Nino's in one of the songs.
I don't know. I don't know. So I guess digging into the actual review.
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw some of my impressions out there, and then you can do the same, and then we'll dig into the specific stuff. I thought overall, this was a good metalcore album. I think they're a good metalcore band. Like, I've listened to the album, oh gosh, probably half a dozen times, maybe more. And they fall into that same pool of, like you said earlier, As I Lay Dying. I liken them to Demise of Eros, some August Burns Red.
Yeah.
Just bands of that nature that are a little more metal than they are core.
Right.
And their guitarists are really, really good. Unfortunately, being lumped up into those bands, they have the same problem those bands have. To where if you turn the album down and just have it kind of playing at a low to moderate volume in the background, it's hard to tell what song is what.
Right.
There are standouts on the album, and there are standout sections on the album, but like, there's a certain point in time where I was like, oh, it already started over. Didn't even realize that I was on my second or third listen at that in that sitting. So,
right.
Just being honest, that's not my favorite style.
Yeah, well, it's something that happens with a lot of albums that are in this vein, because what you just said can apply to any of the heavy hitters within the genre. You know what I'm saying? You put in I'm about to get a whole lot of haters. You put in a Killswitch Engage album, and like I've never been a big Killswitch fan.
See, I love them.
And don't get me wrong, like, I forget what the vocalist's name is. I think he's an amazing.
Jesse is the vocalist now.
I'm talking about Howard. Yeah, he's an amazing vocalist, but like, after a while, I don't know. It's exactly like what you said. You could play him in the background, and I'm just kind of like, And I definitely don't want to insult Semper Acerbus by saying that.
Right.
But I think it fits the mold. You know what I'm saying? I think there's certain albums you go to that fit that. You know what I'm saying? If you want to listen to something that's driving and it's got a lot of similar riffs and things like that, and you go to it. And I think this is one of those albums. And then if you want to listen to something that's just like, oh, that's way different, you go to Korn. You go to some of these other albums that like every song is completely different from the last.
Well, and again, I don't mean that in a negative way. They remind me a lot of Unearthed. Out of all the bands in that genre, they remind me so much of Unearthed, because
absolutely.
Unearthed is an amazing band. These guys were great, but it's like after a while, when everything stays turned to 10, and it's like we're doing our album right now. We're arranging our album. And I told you, I was like, I want some slower, heavier songs to break up some of our fast songs to avoid this problem that I'm having right here. Listen to this. It's like one song at a time. Holy crap, these guys are great. 5 songs in a row. It's like, okay, you've been turned up to 10 this whole time, and it kind of starts to lose a little bit of its, not so much the meaning, but it's like, this is not special anymore. Every single song, you're going just hard, which there's a place for that. And I like stuff like that too. So I don't want these guys to be like, oh man, these guys didn't dig our stuff. I dug it. But it does fall in those trappings of that style. Whereas we talked about last week on the show, we talked about the Convictions EP, which they actually, I meant to send this to you, they actually said it's an EP. You're right. Spotify mislabeled it. But anyway, their stuff was so start and stop that I was like, okay, that's a little too much. And all their breakdowns, they had like the weird stuff going on. And so it just takes, again, it's the opposite problem, but same result, where it's like, okay, what you did is not special anymore because you just kept doing it. And it's cool that you can do it.
Yep.
Like, listening to this Ouroboros album, these guys are way better guitar players than I'll ever be. Their worst day, I couldn't keep up with them. And their riffs were great.
Yeah.
And even some of the breakdowns in some of the songs were freaking awesome.
Yes.
But again, it was just like going to 11 just the whole time. So I liked it, but overall, I couldn't tell you, without actually stopping and writing down about 4 of the songs, I couldn't tell you the difference if you played it right now in front of me. So just because it was a lot of...
Right. Well, and I think there's something to be said about being able to write an album that, like, you don't skip anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's an impressive feat, because there are a lot of albums that I enjoy the majority of the album, but there are going to be songs that I'm just like, nope, skip that one.
Yep.
And this is definitely not one of those albums.
Correct.
I feel like every time I listen to this album, which will be plenty more times in the future, every time I listen to this one, I'm just going to listen all the way through, and I'm going to enjoy the whole thing, because it's all. I even enjoyed the instrumental in this album, because I felt like, so last week I talked about how the Convictions instrumental was like kind of just,
why did it even exist?
Yeah, it's just there, you know. And I think part of that had to do with because there's so few songs. Yep. And I was misunderstanding how many there were supposed to be, and I was just kind of like, why would you put an instrumental on something that's got 6 other tracks, you know? Yep. Doesn't make any sense. But this instrumental, man, I felt like it told a story. I felt like it was a little journey, you know, and it's almost like you could picture a place in your mind as you're listening to it, you know, that you're walking through or whatever, and it broke the album up in a really good way. So something else, if we're just talking about generalities with the album, I relate them probably the strongest to a band called Bleed the Sky.
Okay.
From, I don't know, 2005, 2006.
Yep,
they're actually still around, but that's when I picked up on them, was around that time. And there's just certain qualities about the guy's voice and just the way they structured some of their songs that really, really reminded me of that. And so something else that I really enjoyed about the album, I loved. You might actually disagree with me on this one, but I loved the bass tone on this album. I really did. Like, it reminded me of the Undeceived album by X-Toll. And I know that's weird. I know it's weird to go there, but like, there's just certain quality about it that's like, it's not crunchy, but it's got a high, like, round sound.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that, because a lot of times nowadays bass is either really, really crunchy or really, really distorted. And I think that those are good sounds with certain styles of music, but I think with these guys, man, it fit, you know, because if you pop in, and we're going to bring them up again, if you pop in As I Lay Dying, you know, and just listen through their album, their bass tones are very, like, just a very low end, a very not really even distorted, just really, like, it's meant to bring up all the low end because the guitars are playing so high most of the time.
Yep.
And with these guys, I felt like it cut the mix enough that you could hear it, and it was good.
I had went back and listened to it specifically seeking that out because I listened to it on some decent speakers in one of my offices.
Right.
And I was just like, I can't hear the bass at all. You know, I mean, it's got a sub and everything, but it was like you said, it cut the mix, but it didn't choose a side either way.
Right.
So I went back in with headphones and was like, okay, it's there.
Yeah.
But it, you know me, I really like for that bass to stick out. It needs to choose a side one way or the other. Yeah. Typically, I like a crunchier, you know. I like a bass. I mean, just with our last release, like, I really have like a love for the bass tone to. Oh, yes. Hey, by the way, I'm here. Like, I'm not just the guy that kind of sits in the background and stands around, you know, like filling in the bottom. But then again, I also typically run my guitar tones real low anyways, so
well, you know who else has a similar bass tone to these guys, and this is gonna be a jump too, but Mudvayne, Ryan Martini, he plays a Warwick, and Warwicks actually have a tendency to cut through the mix really well anyway, because they've got a lot of beefy mid-range. Mm-hmm. And like he plays one, so does Trey from POD. He plays a Warwick, and those basses always cut through the mix because there's that boosted mid range that just kind of shines. Yeah. And I don't know what kind of bass is on this album, but it was a very similar tone. And I don't know. There's something about the quality of that I like, and maybe it's because I own a Warwick, and that's what I played for years, and you know, I just got used to it. So it's like,
well, again, not a good or a bad thing. It just, me typically. And it probably wouldn't even, to have a high, crunchy bass just kind of hovering over the guitar probably wouldn't even fit in an album this metal,
right?
You know?
Right,
and
right,
this, I don't want to say it's progressive, but it's just constant. Like, the guys are just riffing. And the thing is, going back to my new metal love, is that I love to carve out a space for the bass
to shine,
even if you just stop playing guitar for just a second. It's like, bing, 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 here's your bass, boom.
Yep.
Because, like, with us, especially the stuff that we're releasing right now, it's pretty constant. We're going.
Yep.
And so in our mixes, and one of the songs that are going to come out here soon, it's another stop. Hey, wait, here's the bass player's here. Boom. Let's go. I will say probably the most negative thing I have to say about the album is that the vocal mixes are so low. Like, I just don't feel like it stands out. Like it's. And I'll use an example. When one of the guys reached out to me and sent me their stuff and asked if we would review it or whatever, he sent me the YouTube video for the song they did with the singer, the new singer, not the old singer, not Christian, the new guy from El Nino.
Right.
And so I was like, whoa, El Nino? Oh, you got me, because I'm a freaking huge fan. And I do like their new stuff. Problem is, and this isn't a vocalist problem, it's more of a mix problem. I couldn't tell the difference between both the guys. Like, I couldn't tell who was who. Watching the video, I was like, oh, this is the part where that guy screams. This is the part where this guy screams. Right. But I thought overall, all the way across the board, that the vocalist never had his time to shine, to show what he could do. It was like, here's my range, and I'm similar to just that genre in general, because all those bands that I mentioned earlier, they all have their spot. It's a very mid-range, constant scream.
Right.
And again, personal taste, I like whenever, even if that's your space, you layer, again, choosing your side. If you're going to be a mid-range screamer, throw some highs in there with it. Break your stand out a little bit.
Well, it reminded me a little bit of the way Still Remains used to do.
Yes.
And just because, Still Remains, at least this album had inflection. You know what I'm saying? Still Remains used to have nothing.
It was just here's my throat.
And you could tell what words he was saying, but it was just like, man, that's the tone you're going to get through the entire album, and then somebody's going to sing, and then that tone's going to come back. And I agree, man. I would have loved to have heard just a little more range vocally, but I think the guy's a really good vocalist.
Yes, and I want to make that clear too. He's not bad at all.
Yeah.
But it just was like, I guess you'd say my biggest gripe was that he kind of got buried in the mix a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas 2 decibels up, he would have been like, oh, okay. Now I can really grasp what this guy's doing. Again, not a bad thing. Then again, I don't even think it's a vocalist thing. It might be just a mixing thing. But overall, those are my gripes. Everything else was extremely positive. Listening to the album, continuing to listen to the album, checking this band out in the future. And I even had a couple songs specifically I wanted to know.
Yeah. Well, before you go there, because we mentioned, and I actually do want to break down some of the guitar parts a little more, just because there were several guitar parts that I really, really enjoyed. And as we get to the songs, we could talk about that. But something else I wanted to bring up was the drummer. Okay, so I'm a drummer. I played drums for almost 20 years now, and this guy is we think similarly, right? I feel like if I was presented with the same riffs that he was presented with, I'd put the same beats to him.
There you go.
And it was just, it was fun listening to that, because as I'm listening to the way the guitars are playing, man, there were certain things that he did. I was just like, man, that's awesome. Because they have a lot of those trilly type breakdowns that are like just and those kind of things, man. I loved playing that stuff as a drummer, because it's not slow, it's not sludgy, it's quick, and it's it's enough to break the momentum of the song and just give you something, and so I really enjoyed the drums. I really enjoyed listening to the way that he structured his stuff around the guitars, and and maybe their writing process is a little different. Maybe he is a drummer who offered beats and they put something to his stuff, know. I have no idea, because I know a lot of times we used to write that way. Is I would just, as we're noodling along, I'm going to play something, and then it's like, oh, I bet I could. Oh yeah, let me fit something around that,
Yep.
But yeah, I really enjoyed the drums. I enjoyed trying to figure out what the next beat was going to be.
Yeah.
And usually I was right, which is why I said I think we think alike.
Again, that goes back to the testament of the band's talent. Like in general, like it's an extremely talented band, because like listening to it, I was like, oh man, oh that's awesome, oh that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that breakdown was good. And it's again, when I liken them to these other bands, I'm not liking. These are the big, important bands, like they are in good company. So, but anyways, the title track, Ouroboros. I thought that was a really good introduction to the album to set the tone. Like, this is what you're getting the entire time. It's like it was in motion, and it was like they didn't dance around and do some really long intro that didn't really go anywhere. Like sometimes, and I kind of picked this up from listening to people talk about albums. They're not my own words necessarily. It's just like, oh yeah, I can agree with this. Like the first track and the last track, kind of like where you're starting and how you're ending, like those are really important, in my opinion. And I didn't realize that until I started listening to people actually break down like an album as a whole, because we've never put out a whole album. So for us, it's always been, oh, here's the songs we have. And I don't even know how we came up with the order. It's just like, boom, that's just what we did. And so now that we're looking at putting our album together, I'm like, oh, okay, this actually matters now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so listening to this, it was like, how are they going to start this thing off? Oh, okay, in your face, we're moving, we're going. I can't stand whenever you freaking put on I'll use an example. Emir's Eternal Enemies, right? I always have to skip the first song. And I was like, and now that one is more so for the direction they went with the song, not so much they wasted, a minute of my time or 2 minutes of my time with some intro,
Right.
But even Limp Bizkit's $3 Bill, y'all, the intro track, it's like you skip it every time. Yeah. It's not music,
right?
So like, these guys were like, that's so funny, the type of bands I actually use as an example versus the type of band this is.
Yeah.
Because if I was those guys, I'd be like, what the freak does Limp Bizkit and Amir have to do with Semper Acerbus? But anyways, that's just where my head goes. But yeah, like they just didn't waste my time. They're like, boom, here's the album, let's go. We're off to the races. So I really dug that first track. And again, I really dig the name. Yeah. Again, because they clearly picked this because of Resident Evil, not because of this.
Well, I think you bring up something that I want to hit on, and it's, I actually think that this album, these guys are extremely talented when it comes to figuring out how to begin something. Okay, and that's something that really did stand out to me about this album, and that's the reason I didn't want to review it last week, is because there was something that was grabbing me, and I couldn't put words to it, but now I can. And it's that every single song on this album, I feel like, has a phenomenal introduction. I feel like every track, it's not just a jump start. It's not just like a boom, 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 and we're right into the song. It's like they actually have a purpose to what they're writing in the beginning of the song. It's almost like they have an introduction to everything, but it's not all. So, and this is going to be another weird comparison or whatever. But you remember when 12 Stones originally put out that first album? Yeah, every single track started like the exact same way, and it was that open D picking stuff, And you remember that album because of that. You remember that album because of like how strange it was to have every song be introduced the same way, whereas these guys, it was like every song's a little bit different, but every song fits, Heck yeah. I thought that especially with which track was it? Daymare, which is the seventh track. Name. Yeah, it was a really cool song name. But no, I loved the opening of that track, and I just like, I don't know, it was really cool stuff I thought they did with the beginnings of all their songs.
I didn't put my track listing in any order, so if they do fall in order, that's just where like...
Right.
Because one of the things I didn't want to do is I was like, well, I don't want to sit there and pick apart their stuff and be like, oh, well, this track, I felt this, and this track, I thought this,
Yeah.
But as I'm listening to it, it's like, okay, this stood out to me. So I only have technically 4 songs that I wanted to, actually say, this part was cool.
Right. Was there anything else about Daymare? Because like that one I have a couple more notes on.
No, go ahead. Yeah,
okay, so like Daymare, one of the things that stood out in this track, right? And they did it several times on the album, but they had the classic breakdown build up. It's like this, you know it's coming. You know what I'm saying? And there's so many bands that like either they don't do build ups anymore or they build up to nothing. And these guys weren't one. These guys, man, every time they built it up, it was an awesome breakdown, and that was something. And then the sweeps on that track that were over top of the different riffs, man, I really enjoyed that, because that was one of the places this album, like, that particular part stood out. You know what I'm saying? Because they didn't do it on every track. They didn't do it on, and so it was really good.
Yeah. Dude, I can't stand when a band builds up and then doesn't do anything with it.
Yeah.
This is going to be another weird comparison, but our band at church does that. They do all these big build-ups, and then they don't even come in on the same note. It's like a stop and there's not even like a picking crunch with their. It's just like, why did you do? It like gives me like it's like nails on a chalkboard. Like when you build up to something
Yeah.
and you don't come in strong, like just don't build up.
Right.
So I tell my wife same thing. Like don't even like. So Time to Change is the next one I got notes for.
Yeah.
That one has some killer guitar work. That's one that like I was sitting there listening to it. I'm like, oh man, that part was neat, you know. And then it has a really cool breakdown.
Yep, the one at the end
Yes.
is awesome.
Yes, it's one of the best ones on the album, in my opinion.
I agree.
But that one was one I had to go back, and I was like, oh, okay. And again, like, I listen to things multiple... When I'm picking apart an album, when I'm listening to something, I'm digesting it, I listen on multiple speakers, multiple sets of office speakers, my vehicle, my headphones, like everything. I'm like...
Yep.
And I went back to that one a couple times. I was like,
yeah, that's good.
That was a good breakdown. What you got next?
All right, so one that I want to bring up. All right, and this is going to be a weird kind of get to it point. Okay, but there's this scene in the movie Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls. Okay, the second one, where and it's towards the end. But he's
doing
but he's headed back to the compound, and he's got a freaking monster truck. You know what I'm saying? And he's going to drive in and like crush all the cars and stuff. But there's this riff that's going. It's what I call an attack riff. And it's one that caught my attention because it's a classic death metal thing. Like it's a you know, it's like this just it's so cool. And track 9, Treachery, has a ton of those riffs in it.
Yep.
And I loved that. I loved, like, it's not all that often anymore that I'm treated to those kinds of riffs because it's one of my favorite kinds of riffs. You know what I'm saying? We used to call them not chug riffs, but like just they're like sped up chug riffs. You know what I'm saying? Because it's and it's just there's something to that palm muted downstroke, like just oh man.
Showdown did that, but they did it to the to that motorcycle.
Yeah.
It's like
Oh man!
But
that song had so many of those in it, and I really, really, really loved it. Really loved it. And then, of course, the last breakdown in the song.
Yes.
Another classic build-up.
That's what
awesome breakdown.
My next notes was Treachery's slammy breakdown at the end of it.
Yeah.
So, which again is kind of where my head started going with Unearth.
Yeah.
Unearth. It was like, oh man, like. There's a couple songs by them that like they're just metal songs, and then it's like the build up to the slow breakdown.
Yep.
And I think that song Treachery is really where I started kind of like wrapping my head around like, okay, this is where these guys fit in my metal soup. You know this is where that taste comes from.
Soupcore.
Yep.
I'm going to make that a thing. That's going to be a thing.
Soupcore.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, there's crabcore.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, as you touched on Treachery, that was the next one I had, and then the last one I have notes on that I really was just like most likely the most standout of the album to me would be Through the Glass.
Yes.
Not the best song on the album, like totally.
But that bendy breakdown at the end.
The breakdown at the end, that was it. That was the best part.
Yeah. So that one was the first one that really, really caught my attention. Like it really, like just the way that breakdown went.
Yep.
And just the I don't know, man. I love bendy breakdowns.
Me too.
I love when the guitar just you know, that sound is
yes.
It's so good. But yeah, okay, so another one that I probably had, you know, just wanted to mention the track with Emil. I loved the structure of that song. I loved the riff changes because there was like every single riff. There's almost like a pre-chorus and then a pre-chorus.
Yeah.
And both of those riffs are really different and goes into the chorus, which is very driving and melodic and everything. And really enjoyed that song. But then one song that we talked about last week.
The very last song,
Flesh Wound. There's a reason that I love that song. And it's because there's one single riff that they play twice in the song that reminds me of 2 Inches from the Main Artery by Through the Eyes of the Dead. It's that I don't know. It's just it's something about the way that, and I don't even know how to describe the riff because it's one of those you know it when you hear it sort of things.
Yep.
but that's what drew me to that song, and that's why that Flesh Wound is probably my favorite song on the album, and it's because of that riff. And I have this tendency with a lot of music, something will catch my ear, you know, and it'll just be some little aspect, some sound, some riff, some noise in a song, and like when I go back to listen to it again and again, I realize that the rest of the song is not necessarily my favorite,
right?
But it becomes my favorite because of that one part, because of that one single
when
moment.
When you said that to me, I was like, you know what? That's actually my least favorite song on the album. But I do know what you're talking. I know exactly what riff you're talking about because I was like, oh, that part's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's a bad song, but like there were just things that really stood out about the others. And the thing that's unfortunate is the song with the dude from El Nino is actually not even one of my top 3 on the album. I was like, that was what I was most hyped about. Yeah. And then that was like, okay, that's good. But these other ones, like that Bendy breakdown, man, that was, again, when you said earlier, like a treat. Yeah. That's what that was. Yeah. I was like, oh, yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot. So,
like I said, overall, man, I thought this album is very strong. Very, with the genre saturation that is there, you know what I'm saying? Like, just in that milieu, right? I think these guys are going to have to do more standout stuff to make them as a band overall stand out, right? I think some of those different riffs, man, I think that really gives them a shot at kind of making themselves louder than all the noise. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm hopeful for that, because I think I read on their website that they've been around since like 2016, somewhere around there. It could be before that, but you know, I really like the album. I think they've got a good future if they keep it up and just, you know what I'm saying, keep with some of those nasty guitar riffs, man, and some of those awesome breakdowns.
The last band I will liken them to, and I kind of wanted to use that in my closing thoughts, was Chimera. Yeah. They remind me of that 2003-ish, the not Pass Out of Existence, but the next one, gosh, I can't remember the name of the album. It's the White Album now. But anyways, just that, and again, vocally, the vocals aren't even the standout of that album. It's just that those guitar riffs and just the instrumentation, like it was powerful and solid. It was like they did really cool things, and that, again, that's where another one of those bands that are just like super metal, and then they do like, oh, here's just a cool thing we do every other song or whatever. And it's like, I really dug, you know, I liken them to those guys, and that's one of my favorite bands. You know, like, I freaking love this guy. So overall, I thought this was super strong. I enjoyed it. I would love to, to see what the next one sounds like. And actually, one of the guys, I've talked to them about being a guest on our show to talk about the album.
That would be awesome.
So it'd be really cool awesome to sit down and be like, I know they released it independently, so I don't know if they're like us. They do all their own recording, mixing, and mastering, or if they send it off somewhere. I would love to know how they, got the dude from El Nino to do the song with them and the video, the music video. So I'd love to pick their brains and talk with them. And I mean, hey, I enjoyed it. If you're listening to the show, I think you should check it out. There's really no excuse not to. I mean, it's good freaking metal.
Well, I've said this about one or two other bands that we were possibly going to have the opportunity to interview. But if these guys would have been around when I was discovering As I Lay Dying, Kill Switch, Still Remains, all these guys, like these guys would have been above all of them in my book. And so I have hopes for their future albums, man. I have hopes for them as a band, and I think they have an opportunity to cut the noise. You know what I'm saying, and kind of make their way in it. So
awesome. Well, Trey, thank you so much for taking the time to do this review.
Thank you.
With me. And I always say that to you as if you're a guest, even though you're just as much in charge of this thing as me. So, but anyways, thanks for your time, regardless. Yeah. And so the next time we get together, we might have something special. Might have another band. We've got the owner of the slick.com. He's going to be coming on and talking to us about his website and how he categorizes and discovers Christian metal and death metal bands and all that stuff. Right. We're going to have the guys from Beyond the Grave on again. Daniel from Ark of the Covenant is going to come back on and join us. We got a lot of cool stuff lined up. A bunch of other bands have reached out and they want to be on, and then we've got some other reviews and discussions coming up too. So a lot of cool, fun stuff for us to do here on Sounds Heavy.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yep. So with that being said, thanks for listening, and we're out.
Stay metal and listen to something that sounds heavy.
Booyah.
Bow down! Is the Lord. He made us in his own image, yet loving formed us from the dust. Behold the glory of the one who sits upon the throne. The Lord's, yet everything in it, for out of nothing He created all life. It is the light, yet everything in it, for out of nothing He created all life. So what shall we say? That men are without excuse by what's been made. God has revealed himself. Without excuse, the Lord commands the valleys be cast down, the mountains rise. That's the sunshine. Are you so question good? Your doubt is wise, as if you made yourself. No man, you are right.
And they say there is no